Yep, microphone was off. I had a desire for an afternoon cup of coffee. Sometimes I'll do one in the morning, and then I'll do one right after lunch. So I decided I should go make that coffee before I sit down. It's not done yet, but so I just watched Bam's video that was posted in our Discord. I don't know if you guys have watched this one. It's the one that says moving into the most powerful ZOSs for 12.3. It was one he posted on December 3rd. I actually really like this video. I don't necessarily agree with some of the TA perhaps that he has, because Bam's model, in my opinion, doesn't seem to... It's this one right here. I don't know what it is exactly. Like, his model doesn't seem to ever call for down, like major downside, which I'm not sure if he's just not presenting that in order to stay more positive or what. And then he talks about in this video, like the history of kind of what's gone on since the Judge Zern decision. You can't see it on the screen at all, but it's pretty good. Like, I thought it was a pretty good video. It's a very succinct recap, simple in a lot of ways. I don't, again, necessarily agree with this idea that you couldn't have predicted that drop. And that was the drop that happened more recently, the bigger one that we lost like 40% value again. I disagree. I think the evidence was there that it could come down to 6. I think that most of us were anticipating that this could be a real good breakout, but what he says in the video, again, like, he's talking about news versus the stock price, and I couldn't agree more with that. The news has been very counterproductive for us, and this is a big news week for AMC. I have this on the screen for a reason. I'm going to look at these two together, but it's a big news week for AMC, and it's going to affect the stock, whether we like it or not, because it's going to affect the whole market. So, you know. Anyways, but yeah, I actually think it's a really good video. I don't normally like pump other people's videos or anything, but somebody posted it. I watched the whole thing. I felt like it was a good recap. Again, like, I don't necessarily agree with every point that he makes, so it's not an endorsement of every word that the guy says. Because I think from a technical perspective, like, this is one example. I was trying to illustrate it, and then I lost my train of thought. He said something like this was like a beautiful advance that looked like it was going to break out. Well, I don't agree with that. When we went above, I mean, it was really silly to me. Like, when we went up here to like the 1050s, if you were around, you know that I got like really nervous because it just, we needed to have this kind of low buy-in and then go up. And instead, we just went straight up to the top. And it did it in a way where it would come above the top and then close beneath the top. And that's typically distributive. So I disagree that there were no signs that this looks somehow perfect. There was also this, you can see it in the RSI on the 4-hour. There was a really clear localized divergence, and even on the big picture, this is a pretty major divergence. So it's coming up in weakness, you know. That's what that tells you, that it doesn't look as strong, and you can see it in the volume too. It's just much weaker on the second push. Anytime you come up on a stock and you make a big push and then you come up higher on a weaker push, there's a strong chance that that RSI is divergent. And you don't even have to look at it. We talk about that all the time on here because it's just something that happens a lot in the market. You'll see that first big push, and then you'll see a second push that looks like it's going to go higher, and it does, but it goes higher on like weaker volume. It almost always results in some big pullback. Probably a pretty easy one to trade. The same thing applies in push downs as well, is that usually if you get a big push down and then a secondary push down on weaker volume and it goes lower, you typically see that that's the stopping place. Not always, but it's a typical thing. So in this case, I know it's like nitpicking, but it's one thing that he said that I just don't agree with. Like, I think the signs were there. I think whoever runs the stock, the operator, and I do think it's been largely short operator, you know, driven. meaning there's a bunch of people who are in short positions on this stock. I think they were aware, and even the long in this position was probably aware. I don't know how, but I just think that they were aware on this push up that it was about to distribute. And the effort that was made, in my opinion, was kind of masked with a uptrend. But I think it was very evident. And that's part of the reason why I was able to pick up on it, because it just threw me off that much. We don't talk about instinct or anything like that because, frankly, that's not provable. Like, you can't prove that you have good instinct or bad instinct. And instinct isn't always reliable. Sometimes our instincts are wrong. Preconceived notions can cause us to make stupid decisions because we think that something's a certain way and it's really not. People do not always have good instinct. They're a dime a dozen on Netflix right now, but there's a whole series of, it's hard to watch it, but there's a whole series of like movie, or it's called like the Innocence Files from like Project Innocence, of these people who provide false testimony, and like they think that these people are guilty and they're really not. And of course it's proven later beyond reasonable doubt, and typically with DNA, it's the main way these cases get reopened, that the people who witnessed these things, who were like so sure of themselves because their instincts were always right. One lady gets on there and says, I'm always right. I always have these feelings and they're always right. And then turns out she puts this guy in prison for like 20 years. He didn't do anything, but it was her testimony that put him there. So like, it's just an illustrative point. Like, we don't talk about instinct very much on here on this channel, because it doesn't seem like it would be a part of the mathematical setups. I don't think it is, but that doesn't mean that it's not a reality that we live with. So like, I have instinctual feelings at different times based on volume. Like, it's like something I've seen before, right? It's like this deja vu, and you're kind of like, this feels right or this feels wrong. And I remember this area right here. It's just an example. Feeling wrong. And, and I don't know, I think from a technical perspective, a lot of folks, I guess BAM was also thinking about that 13.5 area. I know that Ants Trades was apparently laughing that I said 6 something when we were up here, but I don't say those things unless I have a really strong, I know it sounds like not fair because it sounds like I'm elevating this above statistical data. I'm not. But if I have a really strong instinct that this could happen, I might present it. And I presented that 6 thesis earlier than most, because I felt like that was probable. The same thing applied to that $9 pullback. But what I do think is awesome about that BAM video is he's talking about the judge decision and Adam Aaron's responses to everything, and how they come at these really critical times, like, dilution announcement. It's like right when we're trying to move into another level, when it's at sort of a peak advancement point. It just seems way too coincidental. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But it's a good video. I recommend it. I would say it's a good watch. It's a good use of like 30 minutes of your time just to help think about it in the big picture, big grand scheme of things. He talks a little bit about price over time. One other thing that I thought was kind of interesting in that video was he said that a lot of people didn't think it would come below $3, which is basically right where it, kind of hinged on $2. This is where the whip around happens, like right at 2, which is now 20. And he said he didn't think it would come below $3 or $2, which is $20 to $30. And I wonder if we had worked together. Well, yeah, I know, Reese, you saw it too a long time before I did. So there's that. See, somebody always beat you to it. Just for the record, I was talking about possibly coming down to that 6 area when we were up here, but Reese did put me onto it before then with the trajectories. So just so everybody knows, that didn't come from me. That came from him. What came from me was that once it hit that top, I was like, yeah, this doesn't look right. It's not how you want to approach the top, and it seemed too rushed. But one thing he also said was like everybody was expecting 30 to 20, but I wonder if we had communicated if he would have thought the same way, because I don't know if he even. I talked to Bam like once, like 2.5 years ago or something. Like that's the only time I've ever communicated with the guy. We'll just say directly, and I don't know. I don't know if he was following what I was doing with that conversion chart, but you guys remember I had like the combo chart for the full year and tracked all that data for a year. It was great exercise. I think it was really interesting. But one of the things that struck me was he was saying that everybody was talking about that $3 to $2 range. But I would have disagreed with him if he had said, I think it stops there. I would say that that's already been explored, like that liquidity. And we've talked about this so many times, but like, it's kind of interesting to me because I don't know if he's thinking that because all these other people said that that's where it would be, or if it's because it's above all-time lows. But man, I don't know, we have talked about this so much, but the one thing that stood out to me about that particular level was that $30 mark was the liquidity average. So when I did the combo chart, I did like proportional averages, and averages of averages and all this crazy stuff. And we know that Ape traded here from like 160 to 2, like right in this area. And then the combo chart, which would have been like your liquid average, was like way up here, just below. So though this could have set up, in my opinion, this could have set up as support down here at like 16, and then, resistance at 30. Once it passed over, and it kind of happened right on these two marks too, right here, these two little, I don't know what you want to call them. On the rotation, I call them cat ears, but they're really just like zigzags. I mean, I don't know, just little bear flags. It really happened like right there. So it's kind of interesting because they really largely avoid all that middle liquidity. So it's kind of an interesting idea. Like, I wonder if we talked about that, what he would think about that study that I did, and whether he thinks that matters for his narrative and ideas. He might change some of the way he thinks about it. I don't know that it would give him anything conclusion-wise. So I noticed about, I don't know, back here last Monday or Tuesday. I noted that there seemed to be a delay in what was going on in the S&P and what was going on in AMC. And I went and checked out I actually did a bars pattern. I never showed anybody this because I didn't think it was that relevant. But I did a bars pattern about AMC, and I looked at where I guess what you call the bars, like lined up with one another, and it seemed like everything was like 9 days behind. Because I was hearing, and I went and checked on it because I just wanted to make sure. I was like, I don't know. Somebody said something somewhere about it being potentially inverted, like it was doing the inverse of AMC. And I was like, well, okay, so let me go check it out and see if it's actually inverted. And a lot of this starts back in September, so September 7th. And it's a ways back, right? And you can see like they don't look the same at all in terms of like direction after that point. But it was surprising to me because, and I'll just do it real quick so you can see it. Because I was like, well, it's not exactly inverted. It's more like delayed. So it was sort of like following a very similar pattern, but not in the sense that like if AMC goes up, SPY goes down and vice versa or whatever. And I know that you guys are probably like, dude, it doesn't even follow SPY. It's like you should be looking at the, IWM and all this other stuff. I know. I'm aware that it's part of a different group, but in terms of like the market moving on the whole, I think it's a decent one to compare. So let me check this out. I'll show you what I mean. So if you go back to like September, let's just say September 11th. Just here. All right, and you take that, you cut, let's just get rid of that, and we paste it over here. And if you align it, it won't at all look the same, right? You're like, well, that's completely the opposite, Booksy. Look at that. Well, it is if you set it up a certain way. It looks basically opposite if you kind of align it like slightly to the left. You see that? This isn't actually completed. But if you align it like directly, if I can do it right, you actually find that it doesn't look inverted. So it's a strange little phenomena here. Because if you invert it, you're like, well, that looks more accurate, right? But it looks off. So it looks like something like this is happening, and that this is about to go down, which kind of stinks. But that is what it looks like, right? So if you invert it, it does kind of look like it's the reverse. But notice that it's like 8 days to the right. And then if you don't invert it, and you just do it like the normal way, let's say, where this is actually, let's say it starts on the same day, September 11th. Interestingly, and we can get it down there if I can get it in the right spot, it does correlate that the downs are downs and the ups are ups. So like the inversion works if you invert. So like here's an example of this, right? You see like the upside, and then where the upside starts here. And I might be slightly off, but it's close enough. Where the upside starts here, where it caps off. Downside even, in this case, there's a turn down on SPY right before it takes off. That's the same turn down. It's the same dates that we start our turn down. From that point forward, no, I don't think it's the same, clearly. You know, it does kind of flatten out in a similar way. But then I started looking at it recently, and I was like, there's definitely a liquid rotation going on between maybe small caps and large caps. That might be what we're seeing. And if you take the more recent time frame and kind of blow it up, I'm just going to make it huge so I can see it. Actually, you know what? Let's just do the grab now. So it looks inverted if you shift it forward like 8 days, which isn't a good feeling because SPY is going up. So you might think, oh crap, that means that AMC is going to come down. Definitely a possibility. We've talked enough about that, that it should be obvious for everybody. But it's not exactly an inversion. It's like an inversion plus a week and a half. I mean, 10 days is a lot. It's 10 trading days. So that's like 2 weeks. But I noticed in this area, when we were going down, we were doing something different over here. And I thought, that's really strange. It looks like it's doing the same thing, but delayed. So there was this partial decline on this widening. And it really caught my eye. So if you take this and you look at where this starts on, I don't know, November, 22nd? Oh, crap. And you take the November 22nd, actually, maybe I did it twice. Yeah, you can see where it's posting. It's posting it to the side here because I have extended hours on. Let me make sure this is right. So this goes to today. Oh my gosh. Going crazy here. So the 22nd is kind of on this bounce. And notice that if you post this and you look at where it is today, that they're essentially like a 1-to-1 movement. Now that's not, again, maybe for some that's like not profound at all because you're like, well, yeah, no duh. You know, anytime the market's going sideways and indecision's going on, a lot of times you'll see this kind of similarity. I find it to be peculiar because the setup for these is oddly the same, but they're coming from different directions. So both of these are 90-degree ascending broadening wedges, but SPY is a 90-degree ascending broadening wedge that's coming from a drive up, and AMC is a 90-degree ascending broadening wedge coming from a drive down. Hey, you're done, dude. I don't like that word. And also, you posted a really mean comment on my... I'm not sure what got into you, dude. If I remember, you've been around for a while, but something's odd. So... I'm timing him out. Same crap, different day. Who needs a chart for AMC? Well, nobody does. If you want to just buy shares and hold it, then buy shares and hold it. Seems like there's a lot of anger out there in the world right now. I don't know if it's because we're going into the Christmas season and we were hoping that there'd be something better. And I know not everybody celebrates Christmas, but typically this time of the year is like really hit or miss for people. So I don't know if it's a that kind of thing where it's just kind of end of the year and everybody's kind of expecting this to go up and it's not going up. But this is not like, I don't think AMC or anything really, I don't think the stock market in general, this is my own personal belief here. I don't think that any of that's an excuse to treat people without respect. So I don't think that it's bad to be a little bit bummed out. That's not what I'm saying. But just coming in here like that Charmander's guy just did and just kind of laying into people, I'm not for that. I'm not for that on a good day either. But on a bad day, it's just kind of stupid. Like, it's not helpful. If you're not interested in the charting aspect of this, probably not the channel for you. All I do is chart. So if you don't need a chart for it, don't chart it. You know? I've made a lot of good money on AMC. I've lost some money on AMC. But I do think it's chartable, but it's a difficult one. I think if you're a short-term swing trader and you want to swing this chart, has some pretty wild swings on it, you know, with decent liquidity. Like, it's a high liquidity, high risk stock. Is it being controlled by mostly short operators? Yeah. But I think that's been pretty obvious for everyone for the last couple of years. So coming in here and saying like that kind of stuff, I don't know. We're 2 years away from like where that maybe was relevant. Like, it's not news to anybody. I don't get on here and be like, guess what, guys? I just discovered that this has a lot of shorts in it. That would be really stupid for me to say that. So for people that come in just to tell me that, you know, you can't chart this and, you know, you don't need to do this because it's just going to go down. Well, all right. That's your opinion. You know, I disagree. But we can just leave it at that. Anyways, I was noting that it seemed to be like slightly delayed. So notice that this took off on December 6th. And thus far, it doesn't look like we've even finished this perhaps downward motion here. And I'm not saying that it's going to take off. So if you hear me saying that right now, be mindful that that's a dangerous thing to say, because we're basically saying that it has to do exactly like what this did. I am saying, though, that it does seem to match really strongly the pattern that we see that occurred on SPY, but it seems like we're behind it by, I don't know how many days. Looks like a lot. 5 days. That's pretty long. Now, would this break out if it did the same thing and you see this move up? Would it look pretty much like what we were expecting and move back into the 8s? Yeah. But for me to sit here and say, well, SPY did it, so AMC has to do it, that would be silly. What I want to point out, though, is that there's a pretty strong correlation between the two. This begins on November 22nd. This also kind of begins on November 22nd. You can see that that dip is kind of the same in the same day or two, Monday into, Monday, it looks like, into Tuesday, Wednesday. This is kind of interesting. So when did it become off, you know? Well, here, this is December 4th, and this is December 1st. So somewhere between November 22nd and December 1st, there was more or less an acceleration, and AMC took a much longer path. You probably could time it based on the bottoms here. You know, that's November 28th. That's November 28th. This next bottom is November 30th. That's actually Friday, so this is off already. And then apparently it took a lot longer for this move to occur. So this occurred really fast, like within 1 day on SPY, and then it comes down and starts this. And this took several days on AMC. with a lot of buy-in, buying all the way up through that structure and then coming back down. I just find it to be very interesting because they're very similar. Now, from that point forward, I would say you got to kind of analyze them as they come, not trying to like turn one into the other too much. Yeah, and I'd look at something like this, and I'm pretty irritated by what happened here after hours yesterday. This ticked me off because I had that target of 730, and this is the second time this has happened to me where I'm in a trade to get to a particular target, and then I can't get to it because it's in extended hours, and it really irritates me. This same thing happened back over here when I had that target up here of 1050, and this actually went to 11, and I was in a trade to catch that bounce. Maybe that's a dumb thing to do. I know some people are going to say that's a dumb thing to do, but it is what it is. Like, I had the target, and then it still like doesn't give it to me, and it really ticks me off because going into FOMC tomorrow, and then we had CPI data today. We're going to have PPI, I guess, later in the week. I don't remember when it is. It's going to be a news week, and it's going to be volatile probably, but we don't know if this is going up or down. And if this ends up going down, if we lose that 7 or 680 level here, I'm going to be pretty irritated because for me, like, if that was it and that was your main up thrust, and this is some kind of weird, funky head and shoulder business, that just really bothers me. On the other hand, I suppose you don't always get what you want, so it is what it is. Anyways, I can see this as very similar, so I get the feeling it's kind of doing a copycat. In terms of, I don't know, what is it going after? Again, I think it's pretty similar. Like, this was an advancement on what I would call a creek. That's a very gentle one that's established on the top. Usually these guys play out later where you see that this becomes like a key level as it goes. I think in our case, I'm on the sort of extended hours right now. That line doesn't quite match it, so we'd have to use like a different one. And I'll just do it real quick. I think it's very similar. You see how this like advanced right above it? Really similar. So it's a good learning tool anyways, because it's kind of showing us like possibility, and you can analyze this chart that's already happened and see what happened, here that maybe needs to happen on AMC. I think that would be a good thing to do. Let's see here. Go to extended trading hours. Let's take a look. Yeah, I'm not going to move that line again. I think it's fine where it is, but we get the idea, right? So yeah, actually that's really similar. You see that chop right onto that key support level. That was 7, and then it pops up high. So this key support level was 457. And 457 doesn't seem to matter that much. So I wonder if it'd be better to look at this right here instead of this one. This is like the 50% marker, but it's actually the previous top here at 456 that seems to matter more. Because you can see when it comes back up, there's a double support there. One's higher, but this is because it's a creek retest. But yeah, it's around that 456, which is that previous top there. Man, this thing's just sinking. Yep, there's the $7 level. That's the previous top. So it's similar, very similar in that regard. So yeah, this is where the widening starts. This is what I'm trying to say, I guess. If we're going to make the argument that these are similar, we have to see if the levels being tested are similar. So this right here, I believe, yeah, it's fair enough. You can see it. It's bizarre, isn't it? So the biggest problem that AMC has right now with this comparison between SPY and AMC is that it's a different entry. So AMC entered from the top, whereas SPY entered from the bottom. So you could make an argument pretty quickly that it's going to go the other way. So I think that's a big deal. Booksy, have you seen Leave the World Behind? And then Jean Michael said, terrible movie. Yeah, I watched it. I thought it was pretty good. It's a little heavy-handed. I think if you're used to kind of that type of movie, it's a little bit spoon-fed, you know? Like the messages in it are very clear. It's a movie about being disconnected in a modern world. It's not really about the apocalypse and the vulnerability of America. I think a lot of people are thinking of it a little bit like a war movie, because I've read some of the reviews and comments. It is a little bit of man versus man in there, man versus self, and then man versus nature. And those are basic conflict models for movies, movie structures. All drama is centered around those kinds of conflicts. But the main conflict of man versus man was the distrust that Americans have for other Americans. I resonate with that. I think it's true. So I typically found that part of the movie to be an interesting discussion. Are there major plot holes in some of the other stuff? Yeah. But that's where people, if they're going to nitpick it, they probably won't like it. Like the whole war propaganda stuff, that's whatever. The big part to me was the boat. Because I'm like, did the people just abandon that boat? You know? And I worked on a boat, and I guarantee you that if the nav system went out on a boat, that the captain and a number of people who are qualified on that boat, including like, you know, backup captains, would know how to navigate a boat. Unless the nav systems were like hacked and they were like, you couldn't steer the boat, that's different. But I was like, where did the people go? And why would the people abandon the boat and not like honk the horn? You know, those boats have ridiculously loud horns. You know what I mean? So that kind of bothered me. That's the one thing that I was like, that is kind of ridiculous to me. But everything else in the movie, I don't know. You just kind of take it as it goes. Everything happens really fast. It happens in the span of 3 days. It's reminded me a little bit of Lord of the Flies. And I think that's why it's probably going to be pretty divisive, because some people really like Lord of the Flies and other people really hate it, you know? Some people just feel like it's stupid social commentary. For the time, Lord of the Flies was like this, you know, whoa, and that's why they make you read it. It felt like a modern Lord of the Flies to me. That's what it really felt like. Because every character kind of represents something. And once you kind of get it, you see the movie through that lens, you're like, oh, okay, you know. And it's cliche. Like the little girl, she just wants like, she's just innocence, right? Nobody listens to her. Nobody takes her seriously. But she's the only one that sees the signs early in the movie. She's the only one paying attention. So in some ways, she's like more grounded than all the others. Like she doesn't have this like deep distrust of other people. She just kind of goes with it. And she ends up being the first person to find like the safe house, and she's watches, you know, or whatever. I don't ruin the movie for everybody if you want to watch it, but that's not really a big spoiler. The deer stuff is weird. I don't know if you guys saw that. I thought that was really bizarre. That almost doesn't make any sense to me. But I like the idea of taking an animal that we usually see from a distance and like putting it up in your face. And suddenly like in the beginning, they're like, oh, it's a good omen. And the little girl thinks it's a good omen. She's not scared of the deer. But the humans are like deeply distrustful of the deer. Like the adults. So the deer become these like horror things. Yeah, I know. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's perfect. I think as a Hollywood sort of Lord of the Flies type deal, it's probably going to reach more people by being a little bit crazy. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be a little bit crazier than a more grounded approach. So even in there's other things in it. I'm not going to spoil it all if you want to watch it, but there's plenty of stuff that's kind of like, that's sort of dumb when you think back on it. But movies are meant to just kind of take you on a trip. And sometimes I watch a movie and I'll look back at it and I'll be like, yeah, most of that movie was pretty dumb. But if I enjoyed it, I usually am like, yeah, it's all right. You know, it's all right. Like, I didn't feel like I wasted my life. But I think other people, they don't feel that way. They kind of watch it and they're like, immediately like criticizing things, and they find it to be really hard to watch once they find some problems with it. That's just not me, you know. I like to see where the movie takes you. Think about it like a screenplay or what's the director's vision here, and if I enjoyed it for what it is, then I typically am like, okay. And that's kind of the way I felt about that movie. I was like, I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't think I would go much further with it. I wouldn't say, oh, it was a masterpiece or something. Nah. The only movies I've like watched repeatedly are movies that I typically think are like masterpieces. And those are ones that I will watch forever and ever till I die. There's a very small list of movies that kind of fit that bill for me. But, you know, whatever. I think as a Hollywood movie, I think it probably does a good job of challenging people's conceptions and making them think about stuff. And I didn't read the book. I know it's based on a book, so I'm sure that I think the author has a lot he said about it. I'll stop talking about that movie now. So here's what basically happened here. Is that this is, let's try to do our best to analyze this. So we know this level's the same, so that works. It's the same level. This is an early cross right here of the creek, so you get that M shape. We know that that's what we were watching here as well. So we had talked about that in the video recently. So there's an early cross here. Honestly, from this point forward, I don't think there's a whole lot of similarity, but it could be just this nature of like this walk up. It's just up, down, up, down, up. This nature of like this walk up could be more about the strength of AMC on its own, playing out a very similar pattern versus, you know, SPY, which may be in a very bullish rally, right? Consistently, and has been. So it's been on a bullish tear, and AMC has not. So I think a lot of the delay here, sideways action, I'm not going to try to compare, you know, fractal data. I think that's silly. Up is up. So eventually, this did come down and make a bottom, but it wasn't a lower bottom. It was a higher bottom. That's why I'm saying up is up. So once it gets across here, it travels to the top of the creek right there. And then we have this nosedive. And this is the one that's probably going to be a bit challenging to sort of analyze. So what I'll do is, why are we doing this, you might ask? Well, I think if I'm right about this, so here's how I would describe this. What are some of my masterpiece movies? So I like a lot of Coen brother movies. Some of those I'd watch over and over again. I just find their movies to be really palatable for me. Like I don't always want to watch them, but I like a good Terrence Malick movie if it's well done. But I haven't. He's got some of them that I might watch repeatedly, but others I may not. We've got some older movies that I really like. They're not going to be for everybody. Older movies always come with like those disclaimers, you know, like, oh, this was a different time kind of thing. But I'll watch like an older film and really enjoy it. I've got some from my childhood. It's just nostalgia. Like I'll watch with my son, I'll watch like the Muppet movies. I think those are great. They never seem to tire on me. The original Star Wars, I feel like, are really good. 1, 2, and 3 together. I mean, they're 4, 5, and 6, but I've watched those a lot. And you may not agree that those are masterpieces in terms of storytelling, but in terms of their impact on the world and cinema, they're absolutely some of the most important movies ever made. Easily. It's easy to argue. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, the first ones, those are really good. I watched those over and over. I used to watch those like almost every year. You do kind of tire on them a bit, but again, they're based on books, so the books themselves are considered like some of the epitome of English literature, and it's a specific place, you know. Obviously, he wrote it in a specific time from a specific point of view. So again, it doesn't encapsulate everything that modern media is about. More modern movies that I think are really, really good. There's some, you know. I think he's kind of losing his edge real quick. He reminds me of M. Night Shyamalan, but what is it? Jordan Peele. He's done a lot of really great movies. His first one, Get Out, was really good. I think it was the first black made film, meaning it was written by somebody African American. The screenplay, I think it was the first African American screenplay to ever win Best Screenplay, which is crazy. Just to think about, why not? You know, like, why is that taking so long? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying like you have to have like an Academy Award winning resume to be on my list. But there are some movies that I just feel like are super good. Like, I think they're good and they should be rewatched. Really like Lost in Translation. That was an early movie that I really liked, and I don't watch it that often, but when I feel like it's one of those movies that just doesn't seem to age to me. It feels always relevant. I don't know. I am pretty critical about movies, but I'm also friendly enough. Like, I have like categories in my brain. Like, I feel like there's movies that I just like to watch just because they're fun, you know, and I'm like, it's a fun movie. I don't really care. I like all the Mission Impossible movies. I like rewatching the first one especially, but I think that, are they great, like cinematic masterpieces? Meh, you know, I don't think so. But I think they're good. They're fun to watch. So I watch them. I don't know. My wife and I, it's always funny because, like, I think she thinks I'm a bit of a movie snob, even though she's has way more like interest in movies than I do. And she's probably seen like 2 times as many movies as I have in my lifetime, maybe 3 or 4 times. She's the one that got me into like older movies. But she's really funny. She always tells me that, like, if I watch a movie and I say it was okay, she waits like a couple weeks. She said she waits a couple weeks and she asks me again. And then I usually go off on all the things that I didn't like about it. Because I'm one of those people that like slow burn digests movies. I'm always like thinking about them later. And I'm like, yeah. And if I end up disliking it later, it's because there's something that I thought about, you know, later on that just kind of got me. And I'm like, can't do it. You know, can't like it anymore for some reason. I don't know. It's pretty rare. Let me grab some coffee. John Wick is really good. That one's good. Get Smart's really funny. You talking about the original? Wasn't it like a TV series? The one with Steve Carell's really funny, though. I thought it was genuinely pretty good for what it was, you know. It's weird how, like, too, like, I don't know if you guys do this, but like when I'm watching a movie, it's like different genres also, kind of all of them are sort of different in my brain. Because like comedy movies are super different for me. Like if I'm going to watch a comedy, there's not that many comedies that I really like. I'm a really hard person. I don't know what it is, but I just don't laugh at movies very much. So for instance, let's just take like a popular movie, like comedy star, at least he used to be, like Will Ferrell, right? So I think Will Ferrell's a pretty funny guy. And if I were probably to say, like, does he make funny movies? I would probably say yes. But if you sat me down and I watched the movie, I probably wouldn't think it's that funny. Like, I wouldn't laugh that much. I might laugh at a couple moments here and there, but I'm not like a big comedy movie guy, even though I like to laugh. And I'm the same way with comedians. Like, I can't almost ever laugh. I don't know what it is. Comedians, like, rarely make me laugh. I don't know why. I can't explain it. But if I think about movies and then somebody's like, hey, do you think The Other Guys, the movie The Other Guys, which is the Will Ferrell and what's his name, Mark Wahlberg movie, do you think that's funny? I'd probably say, yeah, I think it's pretty funny. And there's some of his movies like I would watch over again, you know. But then like, would I put them in my top 10? Maybe not, you know. So it's also a question of genre. Some people really like comedy. So if you really like comedy movies, and your top 10 might not have any drama, you know. If you really like action movies, you may not have any, you know what I mean? You may not really enjoy like historical drama or something like that. I mean, I have a pretty wide taste in movies, but it's also something I think about a lot too, is like, I probably have like a top 5, top 10 for each genre. I think it would be fair to separate them. So here's what we're looking at. I think that what's going on here, oh man, actually I'm not sure. Where is this going? So they're going back. I'm going to have to check something real quick. So let me look at, I know I'm just talking about movies and stuff, but hey, it's a slow Tuesday. We're seeing downsides, kind of lame. There's tons of time to do TA on AMC. Some people are in and out and they're like, what is he talking about? He's not even talking about, he's not even talking about AMC. I'm out of here. Okay. Yeah. So let me see. Was this, but I'm just trying to chew the fat, you know, as they say. People don't say that very much anymore. I get a lot of strange looks when I say that, but all right. So I'm going to set this visible range profile to like just before the drop down so that we can see it. And it looks like it jumped just below the high liquidity. So it came down pretty low. That's just, I think of it as like one piece of a puzzle. We'll look at some other things here in a minute, but that's high liquidity right there. So it came just beneath the highest liquidity. So that's a big deal for me. And you can see when it took off and it came back just below the high liquidity on the upper area as well. Usually that's where the trades, most of the trades are loaded or offloaded, you know. So that's one part of this. I'm trying to see where this came back to exactly. Man, I don't really see a whole lot of evidence of any real support here. Maybe, you see on this like kind of cat ear distribution coming down after this top, maybe you would say like that is a big part of it right there. This obviously acted as a support. It wasn't the only major ones, but it was a big one. Kind of reached down towards it. Let's check the retracement here on the bigger thing. Bigger move. It looks like, just so happens that's a 786, 854. It's a pretty deep retracement. So it came almost all the way back down. So we're starting to see like, okay, there's clearly like an early, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. There's pretty early on, there's a, I would just say support resistance level picked out that continues through this range. This is a widening. When this thing does its big spread, this ends up being an 854 retracement at the end. It is a jumping of creeks. I don't really see what creek this is testing. We didn't really check that. I usually like to do like a fib fan. That could be at 50%. Let's check it out. Where's the bottom? Here? Top's here. Almost 50%. So when I say 50%, what I'm doing is thinking about the distance this traveled from bottom to top and like where that halfway point is roughly. You probably can't see it very well, but it's at like 456, and that's where my mouse is pointing. So it's not quite right. It's like right here. So it's kind of heading towards it. Doesn't ever really get there. But definitely seems like a big part of it. If I'm using the top, this looks like it actually loses the top here and then comes back above. I don't know. It's kind of debatable. I wonder if we went through here at 50% instead. That works really well. That's the first hit instead of the second hit on that double top. And I bet you in non-extended trading hours, I bet that looks more accurate as the two tops. I don't think you see this in regular trading hours. You see like the lower hits. So if you use this one and then you use a 50% here, yeah, it's right on it. Right on the money. Right there. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer. Why does that matter? I would say that it matters because this happens a lot on AMC during breakdowns and also breakouts to the upside. Almost every single one of these breakouts to the upside go to the 50%. So what I mean by that is if you were to create a spread here from top to bottom on this trend and you drop a line right through the middle back to the previous spot and then you drag that outward, this is almost always like the creek that's going up against. So this has to do with those sine waves that we talk about all the time. The same thing applies here. So you may not think maybe it's not always super applicable. Maybe there's problems, with that methodology. You're not wrong. One of the problems is that it's hard to identify whether you count which top. Like which top should I count? Should I count the top where it rejected or the top where it went highest? Those are issues that you might run into. This one actually seems like a pretty long-standing one right there. So you can see again, is it really going on there? No, it goes beneath it, but it does check it before it leaves, and it definitely shows respect. So another one that's good to kind of keep in mind. It's very simple way to think about sine waves, but it works a lot of the time. I think this 50% was also really spot on, if I remember right, to the upside. So if you did this one down, and then you did like a 50% marker, and then you kind of kept it right there, you can see it anchors and it basically drops off right where that 50% kind of finishes. So it's kind of interesting. So what we can do with that information is that we can take a couple measurements since we think it might be similar. So let's do a 854 and see where that is. I'm not going to worry about being super precise, just kind of get it on the nose, not too worried about that. So yeah, the 854 here is 668. So 668 up to 674 is that pocket. That's kind of similar to what we saw here. So that would be a similar retracement. It does put you beneath this local widening. So it would be like a breakdown of this uptrend. It's not a really big deal. There's only like 2 hits on it, but it's worth at least saying it. So you can see this rise here. So this comes all the way back down to that level. And then what we can do is look at the 854. It's interesting because I already have a line here. So what is this coming from? This was from that parallel thing that I did earlier. It's kind of interesting. It's almost the same as the line that we're about to draw. It's basically identical. I think it's going to be really close. Well, it's close-ish. So let's go to the bottom to the top. So as soon as this hits bottom, yeah, that's the one we should use. You see the little horns and the cross. Cat ear top, cat ear top. This pullback is pretty deep, but this one's way more. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. It didn't make a lower low, so I think it counts. Super irritated about this 733. I cannot tell you how annoyed I am by that. I feel like I got robbed again. out of that move, man. Like, I'm so peeved, like, because I knew that target was supposed to be there, and then it just didn't go there in regular trading hours. And you're like, well, that's nice. Thanks for screwing me over, operators. All right, so this one's pretty loosey-goosey. I'm going to have to remeasure it because it doesn't have any real fixed points on it. It's sort of like there. So the good news, I suppose, is that it looks like it's coming down in a really similar manner to intersect here right at the 854, which would be essentially like pretty much now, like today, 668. And it does look like that 50%, just like here, the 50% is guiding possible direction there. I know this looks really messy, but whatever. I'm on the 15 minute. I'm on the 30 minute here, 15 minute here. Let's go to the 15 minute on this one. And let's take a look at that moving average, because I think that's the 180. Yeah, 180. 180. Okay, so I got the 180 day, or 180, it's not day, but it's 180 moving average for every 15-minute time frame. Really similar in some regards. You can see that this push up above it and then drive down beneath it looks a little bit like it forms out this sort of, I don't know, almost like a head and shoulder, but maybe that counts because of this right here. But I don't know where the other one would be, like way up there. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I don't need to call it a head and shoulder. But I think that we know this was a higher low. This is a higher low. So these are both those middle hits. And then it comes down and makes a new low. The same thing happened to us, by the way, here on the smaller time frame right here. I don't think this made a lower low though, but I got close. And then I believe the same thing was the way that this set up when it left. It was really similar. Yeah, it's really similar to what we see here. This, right there. Remember this? This looks really similar. So if you look, kind of ignore the first bounces here and just look at that like high bounce on the cat ear. So this looks like a cat ear, right? Where there's a cross in the middle and then it comes back down. But notice that what happens here is really similar. There's a bowing that occurs. Let me see if I can get the right there where the middle is kind of suspended. I know it's hard to see that. The middle is kind of suspended, but then it comes down and it actually makes a lower low. And the same thing happened right here, right before AMC took off. These look almost identical in that regard. I wouldn't say the rest of it is, because it's not. Because obviously these have 1, 2, 3, 4 hits on this kind of widening going on. This is clearly just a reactionary uptrend. But here's what I think happened. This is an advancement. So this is like a sign of advancement, perhaps, right here. And then you have a reaccumulation that occurs where it's like jump the creek and then it comes back down above the creek and forms a reaccumulation, which is like a little localized range, and then it breaks out of that localized range and heads up. So it's sort of misleading because at first, and I thought this too, it kind of looks like a UT. This sort of high volume and it just kind of popped and then came right back down. But in a lot of ways, it could just be like a main reaction that's like a sign of continuation. It's a bit odd, hard to explain. It's like what happened to us in January, where way back, where it pumped up really far, and then the remaining portion of it was like this little cat ear area, and then it just took off. This one's a little different than this one, and because you can see that this made higher highs, and this actually came down. But they're both really similar beyond that. They both jump a final creek at the end. Like they make a final advancement, here across like some kind of a creek level, and then they advance beyond there. So once they jump over, they're kind of like good to go. And the same thing applied back here. So it doesn't really make a huge difference that this comes up higher and this comes down lower, because in the end, they both did the same thing. You see that? So I think what that means is that they're finding support. I know this is going to be a bit, it's already super messy, but let me do my best. So I think what's happening is that there's a resistance is being pushed here. So this would be like the last place that you have major resistance. So then this is like, this is it right here. Just so happens to be a nice curve. So I think this is all coming back down to check this creek, and then you're jumping over another one. So wherever that's established, it's established in the middle. So I'm going to move this arrow up. So this is where that creek is established, because if you have the first hit, that's not enough. You kind of have to know where the top is. So this one's being established right here. And then in this particular situation, it's not right there. It's actually a little lower. It's making like lower advances. So then it establishes that creek lower. And that gives you a sense of like where it is. And I think it actually establishes lower and then it advances again. So that if you use this original one, it looks really steep. But then it breaks up here and pushes higher. And you can see that the creek then is raised. I think you can think about it like water if you want. I kind of like the analogy because it just seems to work no matter what you say. But you get the idea. So like that's where the creek is established here. And then that's where it's established here. So this ends up being like a reaccumulation, which is strange. And it's an LPS because it doesn't make a new low in the range. And then it happens to also be that this is a partial rise. So there's a widening going on, and then, there's a partial decline. Partial decline has like a really high percentage. I just researched it the other day. Something like 80%, where it like means that has an 80% more likely to hit the breakout target once it does break out. But if it doesn't break out, obviously you've got another problem. But it's usually like it's like a really strong signal, okay? So if it's a partial decline or a partial ascension, depends on which direction you're trying to go, it can be really, really good. So this is a partial decline. It never comes back down to the bottom of this widening or this like 90-degree spot at 453. So now going to where we are now and looking at it, we would need to see some things happen in order for this to kind of play out. So very similar setup so far. Actually, the levels look about the same. This was set up right on the 786. This is set up right on the 786. Has all the markings that you need. This is the same level, like this particular level that we were looking at before is the same place that it pushed above. So I guess the question now is like, where the heck is the upper creek? Because that's going to be the main confirmation. So the trade here might seem like, oh, I should just buy from here up. That's a huge move, Booksy. You know, if I buy from this area at 674 down to 668, I'll make a bunch of money. Well, no, because that's not confirmed. Like, confirmation is always jumping the creek. Always. Like, it may seem like it's too far away for your liking, but that's where it should always be. So there's two places that I would use. One is there and one is up here. So the assumption that I would have looking at this right now, if this is going to work out, is that I would need to see it come back above these two creeks right here. Again, just as a model of comparison. Now, from that point, where could it go? Well, probably the 8s, right? We've talked about this all week for the last week and a half. And I think people are fed up because it hasn't gotten there yet. And I'm in the same position where I'm like kind of annoyed. We cannot assume that this is going to break bullish, though. We have to kind of understand that in order for it to be officially bullish, it needs to jump back above these two creeks. So, and then oddly, this one, and I know I've got like a million lines on here. It's kind of hard to follow myself, but I think oddly, this one does seem to kind of find, let me see if there's an intersection, but it seems like it is. Yeah, I think it finds the top here. So it meets where these two lines connect. See that? It's really close. It's not perfect, but I don't know if that's just because I drew it wrong, but it seems like that's where it's going, which is good because we might be able to then time it. So if I skip that one and just look at the high here, does that work? Yeah, kind of. Works for these two early hits. Maybe for this as well, even. Ooh, that's a nice trajectory right there. Interesting. Right here, this kind of points, these first cross on this creek kind of point to where you might be heading later. This is kind of fascinating. Well, this is going to be rough because I'm not really sure how else to estimate it. This would suggest that it meets up over here on December 18th. So we've got it drawn a little too steep if that's the case. And I'm just basing it on what I'm seeing here, but I mean, the trajectories are there. We can fiddle with them, I suppose, if we need to. But yeah, that doesn't seem too off. Why does that not seem too off? Because this happens to just be the way I've drawn this, a measured move. So I have it drawn with symmetry in mind, that you would meet a bottom and then potentially run up. And there's some key markers, and it's like right on one of these markers. Technically, it looks like it should be over here, though, on the 21st, not the 18th. It's kind of between the two, so whatever. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I suppose it depends on how you draw this guy, too. I think I've got it a little bit fudged. It looks a little higher to me. So maybe around Wednesday the 20th, because it was slightly late. So somewhere around there is more likely where you're going to hit. Because of how delayed this is, if it follows the same pattern. So, what does that tell me? Well, that hit at 8:30 would be a pullback to here, which is exactly where the lowest I thought it could probably go is like 8:20 because of this guy down here. But I think 8:30 up to 8:37 does seem about right. You see a little like drop off right there. There's two levels here that I look at. But that one's pretty solid. That's like 8:50. I think that one's a pretty good one. It looks right around the intersection. This is already where I've had it drawn, so I'm not trying to do confirmation bias, y'all, but it's there, okay? Look, I'm talking about possible downside as well, but it's important to just say right out the bat, like, I just did this based on a comparison between the S&P and SPY and the particular setup right here and how this traveled. Now this seems to be like a delayed version of the same move. If it pans out the same way, then the estimated target that we just got by doing that comparison is the 830s. So does that confirm or deny what we've already kind of seen? And the answer is that it confirms. So maybe confirmation bias is a thing. I don't think it isn't a thing. But that seems to confirm what we were already suspecting, which we already had this range as a lot of targets. So that's cool. That's a good thing. What I want to do now is sort of take a minute and see if I can determine if it were to bounce here and come up, what trajectory might it come up at? This is where things can get kind of dicey. I don't know where this trajectory came from. Maybe it came from this early entry. So from roughly November 14th, it looks the same. Let's try it. November 14th up to November 22nd. That's 51 degrees. This, if I use the steepest, is 61. If I use these outer points, it is probably very close to like 51. It's 54. Using the, oh, I don't think I'm getting it right. 56. So it's not quite the same. So I don't think it came from there. I guess I'm just thinking of this as like an S-curve. I'm just kind of wondering if that's the same. Yeah, I don't really know where that trajectory came from. That's going to be a tricky one. We can also do it like this. We can look at this and say, what's kind of the main, if you go through the center instead of the outside, that's kind of like the main bread and butter of it. That looks right there. That's 58 degrees. Let's see where this came from. 58. I'm going to get rid of that thing for just a second. And this is a super messy chart. I can't even see what's going on here. Yeah, I mean, loosely, it's kind of where this breakout happens, this push up down to the bottom. I mean, it's close. It's close enough to the top here that I might even just use that and just call it a day and be like, look, it's close enough. That's 48 degrees. That's 48. It looks really similar. So if we're correct and it does bounce, and assuming it doesn't just sink into the bottom of the earth, you know, then we should be able to take a trajectory down, which we've already done. So I don't know. Wherever it hits the low. So it's the same. It's 48 degrees on this chart. I mean, that's just happenstance, though. That's just incidental because you can scale this differently. 48 is not very steep. So this is far less confirmation for me now, because you see how this looks like it's going like way off, and that's not at all like where these upward trajectories are. But what might be the case is that I'm just kind of grabbing the wrong thing and I'm not really getting it quite right. I know there's another one, which is the entry here. So that would be from where this widening starts, which I believe is like right there. Yeah, something like that. Oh, man, I'm trying to remember where I placed that. I think it's like this. I think this is where the widening began. And this is the breakout. So what I can do is take it from the widening down. So that's 60 degrees down to the bottom. There's so many trajectories. I've actually never done a trajectory like this, so I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. 60 degrees. I'd have to find some better examples. 60 degrees. That one actually looks pretty darn close. So that seems very possible as well. So that's like entry of this versus exit of this. So entering and exiting this lower area, that seems possible to me. I feel like it's a little bit stronger than using this bounce, but maybe we'll see it widen out, kind of like we see this one converging. It's like the reverse. I don't know, that's 50, it's 44, 44. Well, that's probably all I want to do with that. I don't want to take that any further. There's a lot of speculation here. The only reason I'm using these right now is because they have panned out before. So I wouldn't be using them if I didn't think they were very reliable. So I think we've jumped the creek. And I think we need to start considering that this particular jump could result in a pretty decent bounce as long as it holds high in this reaccumulation. Because even though I've been kind of down on it for getting below 7, which I'm not a fan of because I think 7 is the previous range, which means if we keep rejecting on 7, we will head down. There's no doubt about it. At some point, if we keep rejecting on 7, we're going down. It means that there's no buyers below that are pushing it up above, and that people are selling off at 7. But I think this is kind of the main narrative right now, is we've jumped over what I would only thing I can consider like the downtrend here. We've kind of come up along this guy, which is bizarre, but I think what it is essentially like a trajectory that has to do with the waves here and resistance. So if there's going to be like a giant trend down, this is the line I would use. I think we've jumped over that as well, and we're kind of going back down to test it. And I think that this set up locally like that. We're doing a 786 retrace. So if I were going to give it like a simpler narrative, I would probably just say, I'm going to start deleting stuff. Let's make this really light so we don't see it very much. I don't really care that one's there. If this is structured the same way that the SPY move was structured, if it happens to break the same direction and it isn't bearish, then my expectation would be that we basically will hit 688 probably today, find some kind of a bottom, and if it's not 688, it'll be 674. Again, this isn't with the assumption that it's basically the same. And then Wednesday, probably, it's hard to say with FOMC stuff going on. Maybe it goes just sideways, pretty much down in this little pocket all day until it's time in the afternoon. And then I think you're probably going to get a Thursday. You could see a Thursday, Friday run. I know some people have said max pan's at 650, but if this pans out, it's not going to be there. Yeah, but see, like that ever happens. Looks like a head and shoulders. Bearish to say the least. Yeah, it does. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it in a mean way, Walleye. This right here looks like a head and shoulder, the big thing. But a head and shoulder doesn't confirm unless it breaks the neckline. So you can say that it looks like that. I don't disagree. Even if it is a head and shoulder, and this is what I've been saying on my particular channel and my videos and junk, that I think that it's likely that it comes up here to this 8 range and retests this particular creek, which hasn't been checked since November 9th. I think that's what the test would be before any kind of drop further, if it's going to drop down. That's why I've got this scenario in mind. It's possible that this is already checked enough and it's going to just distribute from here. And that's more like the stock father narrative right now. I'm not trying to like pin anything on him, but he feels like this is an LPSY. He might be right. And then this would also be something like that. But the thing is this set up in the middle of the range. And I just generally disagree. I don't think it's going to go down first. I think it's going to come up to the 8 level. I've been saying the same thing, like a repeating recording for a little while now, because it's just the way that it's set up. Like I don't know how else to see it. I could see it if it breaks down, but it hasn't even gotten close to that yet, in my opinion. We've been going sideways. So sideways is exactly what it sounds like. So yeah, this whole thing could be a giant head and shoulder. It also could be a humongous W bottom type deal. I really think most of what we're talking about hinges around coming above 7, which is what I've been talking about, again, pretty much every day in the videos. And you guys already know this. Most of you, I think, follow that. So, but I do think that, yeah, that's where the head comes up in the end. So I looked at this as a possible inversion, right? Because you can see this is a narrowing and then this is a widening. So if it happens to leave in the same manner that it came down, we would just kind of take off and keep going. We'd probably end up at that 14 target. And I don't think that that means that we're going to sort of go to the moon. I think that would probably be met by a really heavy distribution. But I also think that that's possible. So there's still a couple things here in my brain that I'm like, nah, dude, I like totally still think that's on the table. I think 1440 could still be on the table soon, going into January. I don't really care if people get mad at that or they think I'm an idiot. I genuinely believe that that's a strong possibility because the setup gives it like all the check boxes that I'd be looking for. I also think that going down to 490 first is also a really strong possibility because, again, the check boxes are all there. The sideways action doesn't give you answers until you see the directional break. What I'm doing today is, look, Y Coffeean looks at this, he sees an LSPY, so that's that, right? Another person looks at this, they think this is like some massive bottom that is going to rip to the upside, so that's that. There's always going to be a bear side and a bull side. I look at this, I think it's mirroring out what we had going on over here. I think it looks pretty obvious that it looks a lot like that in reverse. It seems to be set up on these trends. It seems to be that if it was a head and shoulder, it would need to come back up to 8 before coming down. I also see this as a possible late day, like kind of late price action extension of what we're seeing on the market on the whole, like it's just delayed. It does seem to me like it's a strong possibility because it's been playing out basically one-to-one with what we saw on SPY. The biggest problem being, of course, that this entered from a downward trajectory and SPY entered from an upward trajectory. Very different. Yeah, we're in a falling wedge and a falling channel and you know what I mean? Like it's just, it keeps going forever and ever and ever. And I mean, that's the great thing about what I like, which is like that I think that you can just keep going, which is kind of neat with analysis. Like you can just keep going up to like high time frames and just see what it is. So yeah, could it be a head and shoulder? Sure. Could it be a falling wedge? Sure. Could it be a big W bottom? Sure. How do we know? I think you have to just look at volume. Volume's not a perfect analysis. We saw that volume was very deceiving up here. This is very low volume for tops. Very low volume. Just does not look like distributive tops. But yet it distributed, you know what I mean? And it managed to show weakness right before it did so. The rest of this, I think it's just debatable. We're not there yet. And I don't know why people, and I'm not trying to blame anyone here, but I don't know, man. People get really weird whenever you're kind of indifferent about stuff or you just think that it could go either way. And I don't know what people think that, like, why they find that offensive. Maybe they think that YouTubers should have some kind of a, like it's not ballsy or something, or YouTubers should just say what they're going to say and be right all the time. I don't know, man. I think if the stock presents itself in an obvious way, you should just be obvious about it. I think if there's a misleading narrative, you can talk about it. I think if there's a possibility of one direction, even though we're going one direction, you should talk about it. And then I think the rest of it's just confirmation, because all of that is estimations based on analysis, based on observation. The only reason that y'all are here listening to me is because I have a microphone. Like, that's it, you know? But beyond that, it's like we're just waiting. I'm just waiting for the same thing you're waiting for. I'm waiting to see it come above these guys right here. And if it doesn't, I don't really have any strong reason to believe it should run, you know? So what I am noticing is that there seems to be a pretty strong... Let me see if I can get this to show up better. So I was deleting lines, but there seems to be a pretty strong inclination towards this one. You see that? So locally, I could see this as kind of a head and shoulder, but I think the same thing could have been said about, probably said about SPY right here. You see that? It's no different. Why did this not produce a head and shoulder that distributed? Well, it didn't. You know what I mean? Like, why not? Well, because it didn't, I mean, if it broke the neckline, maybe it did it right here. It broke down, but it didn't produce like the target. So it's not bearish. I mean, it's not that complicated. There was a reversal. So even if you see something, and it did, it distributed across 458 twice, left and right. I think that's debatable. That head and shoulder was there. I mean, I see it here. It looks like a complex head and shoulder to me. So why didn't we just start driving the price lower? Because that's not all that's involved in a head and shoulder reading, right? Now, if this is a head and shoulder and we see that price drop and it keeps dropping, yeah, obviously, like, it's a completely different situation. I'm not saying, again, it's apples and oranges in some ways. They're both fruit, but they have different properties. We shouldn't think that it's going to happen just because. We're just looking at it like it could, because we can see that there's similarities in the setup, and it's similar enough that I'm not just relying on a fractal pattern to tell me how to trade. I'm able to now say with very strong confidence that this has jumped a creek. It's holding above a creek right now, and we need to see it hold above that creek. And it's the same thing that happened on SPY in a very similar way with a similar pattern. And if it does hold above that creek, we should see a similar result. If it breaks beneath that, then we're not going to necessarily see the same result. So we've used a fractal comparison. We've compared two different things. You know, we've looked at those levels. What were they going after at those particular levels? That to me is the best. That's how I use fractals, right? I use the patterning. I think if you can do that and confirm, and we did, we confirmed each step of this. We did it for about an hour or whatever. Then I think it's a valid enough comparison. So that doesn't mean it happens though, right? So yeah, I agree. This could be a head and shoulder, just like the SPY one could have been a head and shoulder. I think that there's probably some similarities there. I would have to look at the daily volume, but I already remember this guy and this guy being wildly different. The volume here was like much greater on this shoulder and head than this shoulder and head on the right. The volume was outweighing it, so the buying was a lot heavier than the selling, which is probably why we didn't break it and make a lower low. This head and shoulder didn't really break down ultimately. So we'll see. Now we're kind of working out the rest of it, so you can see this guy and this guy look pretty similar, and then we'll see what happens. So we know that if it happens to break to the upside, I'm going to get rid of this now, so it is kind of cluttering my chart amongst other things, right? If this happens to break down here and dip below, and I think it will, we're expecting 667. And then we want to see it come back up above here. Now what's interesting at this point is that I was mentioning just a minute ago, and I started getting kind of distracted. If I'm not mistaken, there's probably, yeah, so really close to this level that we picked out earlier right here, which is that 705, which is the previous bottom, is where the most amount of selling has occurred. I wouldn't say it's where the most amount of buying has occurred. The most amount of buying has occurred at 683. That's like the other big one. But right at 7, a lot of selling has occurred. So that's going to be a big one. And you can see that the big hurdle to jump. Oh no. You can see that the creek jump that we need to make is still, would validate that. Like coming up above this and holding above 7 would also validate what we need to see. And then the same thing applies here. So both of these, this would jump over that orange guy coming down, which is similar to the one we talked about in the big picture. And then this would jump over the 7. So each one of these creeks is in a very, very smart position right now. Smart money position. It looks really fabricated, like it's designed to get you over these two hurdles, and they're basically laid up the same way. So I would expect there to be an M cross much like what we've seen before. And I suppose it would be like after this plays out down, since it's sort of symmetrical, this plays out but up. That might be what happened on SPY, because then it had like this big drop. It could end up being like a back test of 7 or even lower. Yeah, and then it ends up doing some kind of crazy recovery. Buys up right here up to 7 again, and if we get out of there, Man, this stinks. And it's going to end up being like a 7. I bet you it's going to end up being a 7 at the end of the week because of all this garbage. And then Monday, you just take off and like go. That looks about right. It's just a guess, but it makes sense. Because Wednesday, you might see it drive up, and then Thursday, Friday, like redistributes down after checking these levels. It goes back down just beneath that liquid center into that little middle area. And everybody thinks it's going to like crash and burn again. And then pops Monday. That way they could pin it going into Monday. They could pin it at 7 right underneath there. 6.99 again or whatever. Once again, people are angry because like nothing happened all week, right? Makes sense to me. Market maker makes his money. Everybody's bored, frustrated. And then, going into next week, you get that bigger move up to what we were talking about, possibly by around the 20th. I know that this is typical for me. Everything gets delayed, and I hate to do it, but it is what it is. I think that the movement of the stock can be misleading, make you think the breakout's coming sooner. But this makes sense to me, something like that. And then going into Thursday, Friday of that week, which is the week before Christmas week, there's a long weekend. You're basically just camping out up here. There's no movement at all. It just sits there and it goes sideways for the rest of the week. And it leaves everybody with a massive cliffhanger because then we don't come back till the 26th, right? So then you have to wait 4 days to find out if this thing's going to break up or break down from this area. So it's enough to make you feel good, and then the rug pull or the continuation happens after the holiday break. It doesn't matter if you guys celebrate Christmas or not. I will probably wish you a happy Christmas at that point. But the market is closed. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. So it is a longer wait. I would be willing to say that if we see this kind of movement this week, going into the Friday the 15th, I think there's a strong enough chance that we're going to see this continue up to 8 before that break. I'm not even in the market. That's funny. I got a story for you today. I helped somebody move stuff, and one of the ladies that was there was like, "Hey, will you come move this thing for us?" And I was like, "What is it?" And they were like, "You into Cinderella?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "We got a big mouse." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Is it alive?" And she was like, "Nope, it's been really dead, and it's really big." And of course, it's a rat, not a mouse. And look, I'm not saying it was pleasant, but I've done it before plenty of times. I've got lots of cats. They bring me dead stuff all the time. So it's not my happiest thing to do, but I'll do it. And the worst thing I've ever had to move was like we had a dead cat underneath our house. It was very decayed, partially decayed. Half of it was like bones, half of it still had skin. I know this is really gross. That was the hardest dead animal I think I've ever had to move. Thankfully, I'm not a hunter or anything, so it's not like something that I would be personally like, oh, I'm super comfortable around dead things. Like, this is not how I am. But you live long enough, you're going to see some dead stuff. And if you're like me and, the women around you don't particularly want to move dead things, you get asked a lot to move to move stuff like spiders, lizards, dead stuff on the porch. So anyways, but I moved this rat and it was pretty big. It wasn't the biggest rat I've ever seen, but it was big. It was very dead. And it was kind of gross. It was really sad too, because they got like squashed or something, clearly. I don't know. Like it got stuck, maybe. I don't know how. How does a rat get stuck? Maybe it didn't get stuck. Maybe it was just curled up in a place to die, but it looked like it was... Its final days were not pleasant, you know what I mean? It's kind of sad. But I was like... I was looking around at the people there, and I was like, well, there's other guys. Like, why didn't anyone else get asked? Nobody else got asked. It was like they assumed that they don't call me Booksy, but they were assuming that Booksy, would move this dead mouse. Like, this was something that I could do, like I'm good at or something. And I was like, all right, well, I'll do it. But I don't know why you're asking me to do it. I guess I'm just have that look about me. Like I just move dead animals in my free time. Hey, you just move dead animals around in your free time, right? Yeah. You look like that kind of guy. Yeah. Thanks, I get that a lot. I do, though. I get asked to do weird stuff like that. Which is funny because I'm not like squeamish, but I've also been made fun of for being a little bit germophobic at times where I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm going to go wash my hands. Because like, I'll touch stuff that I'm not comfortable with and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go wash my hands. And then people think you're like germophobic. And I'm like, no, I just don't want to get a disease, or get sick because I decided not to wash my hands, I think doctors wash their hands like all the time, constantly, Why would you assume that? I don't know. Like I've grown up in the country and I grew up in a lot of woodsy areas. As a child, I got enough exposure to enough stuff. I feel like I did my due diligence with my immune system, and now it's time for me to just be clean. Like my immune system is built up as much as it needs to be now. Let's keep it going, but let's not take unnecessary risks. So that was it. That was my whole... It wasn't a very good story. It was just about me moving a dead rat. But that happened today. Yeah. What did you guys do today? Did you move any dead animals around? That was like 1 minute of like the several hours that I was there. It was not most of the time, but that was part of it. Anyways. It'd be funny, to me, it'd be really funny to sit and listen to somebody talk about the stock market and have no involvement. I don't know if you're just being facetious or not, but... All right, man, we're in that pocket. So I think it's setting up for tomorrow. I think it's setting up for FOMC day for sure. I know that Stockfather talked about Tuesday being like the down day. It's a decent amount of selling. Let me get off of extended trading hours here. It's a decent amount of selling. It's nothing crazy. To me, it looks like the half of this S-curve, and this S-curve kind of being at an angle. I think it's basically done. I bet if we took a measurement here, it'd be similar. So this is like 60 cents. No, that's way too high. What did I do that for? This is like 65 cents. Why does it look like it's going way up there? I don't know. 65 cents will be like way down here. So that'd be like 648. But again, I think that creek, we'll see. If it holds, I think we're going to be in good shape. I really do. I think we'll find support on it today and tomorrow. I'm bummed out about 7. I would have loved to have seen it advance back up to 730 today. Mostly that's just me, though, personally being irritated because I wanted to see that advancement so I could get out of my calls at a reasonable price. With decent profit. I'm kind of annoyed that they did that again in extended hours where they kind of hit the target and then reversed. I don't like that on open, so that kind of irritates me. It's a kind of a cheap way to screw over retail. But I honestly think that otherwise this looks pretty decent. I think we're in a good spot to base here and then turn back around. I'm going to assume that people haven't heard this. So I'm going to have to end up doing a video on it, posting some charts on it later. The only thing bad about being a YouTube person, or I don't know what you want to call it. I don't feel like I'm an influencer at all, but I want to do this to give people information and help people. Some of it might be a little bit self-affirming, but I feel like most of it's just for y'all's benefit. But the thing is in order for me to like communicate effectively and efficiently with other people's, maybe not efficiently, I have to do it again. You know, you end up repeating yourself a lot, which isn't exactly fun. Yeah, they got crushed again. Was it worse than the dead cat at your house? No. You know what was awful about the dead cat was just not, it's the not knowing part. That's the worst thing about stumbling across something like that, because you don't know that it's there, and then all of a sudden you just see it, and it's like, whoa, And I know it's dead, it can't hurt you, but it's not like that. I mean, I guess if it's disease, it could, but if, you know what I mean, it was dead for a long time. But it's this thought of it being under your house at some point and not being able to get out. That kind of disturbs me. And like not knowing how it got there, and it's very strange. Some people probably wouldn't put that much thought into it. They just say, well, it's a cat. There's tons of them. Some of them get stuck places. Or it could have just gotten attacked by something under there. We don't know. We'll see. Back to 7 end of day. I don't think it's going to go back to 7 yet. But hey, if it does, cool. The thing is that the way this has been going, at least with this comparison we've drawn, is that the time that it takes to do these things has been stretching out. So it's taking longer and longer to do the same moves, mostly upside moves, not the downside moves, which kind of stinks. But so this took, I'm going to say it based out for about 16 hours. Most of this occurred in extended hours. That's weird. You can't even see it in regular trading hours. You could just see it touch, and then it looks like it just ends, and then it gaps up. But in reality, it took about 16 hours, which is a long time. So if this doesn't just gap up tomorrow, which I don't think I would assume that it would, if it doesn't just gap up tomorrow, we might still see this sit here for quite a while. Yeah. So here's what I'm thinking though. If we lose this level, here's what needs to happen. If you're thinking about like, well, what about downside? We've talked a lot about upside today already. We haven't really talked about downside except to say we wanted to hold this creek. I agree. We wanted to hold the creek. I think what you would need to see on downside is like this sort of a price action, just like this. It could be very fast, but it would have to basically break down through the creek. And I do believe it's kind of right at that 667 level. I'm not saying 666 because I don't actually think it was there. I think I'd measured it out right. I think it's 667, but it is kind of a spooky level, right? I think we need to break through that, come down to the bottom again, which is around 650, and then it would ultimately have to break that. And so both of those would need a hook. And yeah, obviously if that happens, then the rest of this stuff we talked about doesn't apply. It's different. But I think you really need to see that breakdown. I know that it's tough because I'll sit here and I'll say something. I'll say like on the video today, I said I don't want it to come below 7. But then I also gave you guys levels. I said, hey, there are levels below 681, 672. Those are levels that we've seen before. that have come back, repeatedly whenever we're going down and we're trying to find support. So it's possible you get down to those levels. We didn't talk about 667 because I wasn't looking for that retracement. But I'll say those things, and then what happens is that if it breaks, someone will say something, for example, this is just something I've heard, like they'll say, well, now it's bearish, so we're going to go down. And I'm like, well, when I give you a target, I'm talking about what is needed. So if I give you a target, like let's say this morning I said, yeah, I really need to find some support at 7 because we didn't really get it. Well, guess what? We never got it, right? We hadn't gotten it yet, and then we didn't get it this morning. So that follows that it wouldn't do the move up to 730, and it did not. So because it didn't find support at 7, it's not going to go to 730. Does that check out? Well, today it does. But that doesn't mean that the rest of this is somehow broken down, because we're talking about a really localized area, right? We're looking at this like it's sort of this is a widening right here that's part of a larger widening, that's part of a downtrend breakout, that's part of this huge possible head and shoulder, that's part of this huge downtrend breakout. You know what I mean? Like it just keeps going. So that we might be eventually seeing this retracement back up to 14. Like we talk about these things in layers because you have to keep it in perspective. I need to try to do a better job at this because I've noticed that some people get really angry. It's not about me like trying to people please, so don't hear me wrong. I think it's just me not being clear, because some folks have gotten really angry because they're like, well, you said, it needed to hold above 7. It didn't hold above 7, so you were wrong. No, I said it needed to, otherwise it's going to come down, and it did. So then you talk about the levels that it could go to, which is what I mentioned. But then I think I need to be clearer about that's a localized target, that we're not talking about, I think it's going to come down if it breaks through 7. Well, yeah, it did. But then what happens after that depends now on the next level and the bigger picture. Because on the bigger picture, this could be a little localized spring. Like we just mentioned, we were talking about it on SPY, but we mentioned this bottom, and I since erased it. But it's this concept of that we actually just saw this. It's a reaccumulation concept of this pushed up, and then if this comes down and makes a lower low, and it's a spring action, this bounding right here, this range actually finishes fine, because this is like an auto reaction, and this is a support, this is a phase B top, and then this is a spring bottom. So then if it comes out, guess what? No harm, no foul. Because if this ends up, even if it goes sideways for like a day, which it might, it could for a while, even if that happened, as long as this comes back above here, now you're talking about what? What's going on over here? Well, that's what we were talking about before with the breakouts, like these guys. This is an SOS. We draw this stuff the way we see it. This is an SOS right here also. And then it's also an SOS with a backup. So this is an SOS that then backs up to the creek. So it's starting an advancement, and then it backs up to the creek, gets that support again, and then goes. So it's another little range working out on top of the range. So I see these things as like domino effect kind of things, where you have to get from one to the next. And if you don't get the first one, you're not going to get the second one, And so when it does change, sometimes the TA changes really fast, and you have to be willing to say, yeah, it's different now, but you got to wait. Now here's what you need to see, right? And you got to wait for it to work itself out. And the concept of this sort of predestined move can be very difficult to sort of anticipate. There's a lot of folks that have said to my face or wherever that, hey, this is an algorithm. It has to play out a certain way. Here's exactly how it's going to play out. Well, I disagree. There's been plenty of times where people have shown me some algorithmic, fractal pattern. They think this is what it really is going to look like. And either they're really early or they're late, or it doesn't do what they think it's going to do. It forms like an LPS instead of a spring. And that's why I tried my best to explain like what is happening here that could cause it to go back up. And what's happening here is that I think this is an advancement with a backup to the creek, and this is the creek. And then this advancement, right, with this sell-off, this is then a reaccumulation in the range. So this is your return back to preliminary support here, right? This is the bottom, starting off your phase B. This is the top. So what you need to see is a spring, and then return back to the top and SOS. It just so happens that this kind of coincides with what we were talking about earlier because we were looking at where these creeks are, et cetera, right? So then you look at this and you say, yeah, it needs to come right up here, SOS, get across 7. This could take a few days, and then you end up with a breakout. And potentially this is not the way it happens. I'm not saying it has to come back like this. It could be that this happens like deeper, like right here, like earlier in this trade, and that when we leave, it's more like this. That's definitely possible. But something like that would happen, and then it would break out. SOS with a backup, then you go up, do another SOS with a backup, and then push. And then suddenly this advancement looks pretty strong, you know, moving forward. So yeah, so I don't know, you know, when I think conceptually, like, it's hard for some folks to sort of bring that concept of layers into the market. For me, it's never really been that difficult because I work in like Photoshop and stuff like that, After Effects, and we have tons of layers. Tons. Like, I'll have projects that'll have hundreds of layers in them, and they're grouped together. So you end up having this very organized hierarchy of importance, and you're always kind of working on and grabbing things like in larger parts. And yeah, the artistic term for like all the things working together is gestalt, like Gestalt, I think. And it's this concept of like all these different pieces, you see them all and then you bring them together. And that's kind of how I've always sort of approached the market. And even if I'm not always right, that approach helps me to understand like this is just one small piece of the thing. And it's difficult because AMC is a stock that some people came on earlier and they were like, we don't need charts for AMC, you know, with their shotgun and their baseball bats with nails sticking out of them, you know, like living in a bus apocalypse. We don't need your order. We don't need your math. We're doing just fine out here. It's like, look, man, if you don't care about this stock in the near term future, because you think, well, maybe it goes up to 8, maybe it doesn't. I don't really care. I'm waiting for a drop, see if it goes to 5 or whatever. Fine, then just don't watch it, you know. But for the rest of us who want to know those things, you got to be willing to say, what's the layer, you know, like what's the next step within this layer? We're in a really small place right now. I'm looking at a 30-minute chart. We could be looking at a 15-minute chart, 5-minute, 6-minute chart, whatever. And we could be looking at just this tiny little area and just saying, well, this has to happen in order for this to happen, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you know, it could be. So I think it's a difficult one because of that. I think there's got to be a measure of uncertainty because we don't know how the smallest layer is even worked out yet. I'm comfortable with that. And I even feel like when I do stuff like this, right? This is why I posted earlier. And I'm wrong about it. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm just like, okay, well, it didn't do that. But I have a reason now and I understand why, because I just took the time to sit there and go through it, you know, and say, well, here's what I think could be going on. If this is a reaccumulation, then why did it need to stop here? The only reason it would have stopped here and iterated again which is what I had suggested earlier, would be that it's an LPS instead of a spring, right? Because that's the only real difference between this and what's going on here. You know what I mean? That's it. It's just one is an LPS, one's a spring. An LPS is just where sellers don't have enough sellers to drive the price down. And if this had happened, everyone would be like, whoa, amazing. And you know what I mean? But to me, it's like, all right, well, it's not that different. Because I can tell, like, if that's where it is, that's where it is. Whoop-de-doo, you know? And then you also have the possibility that, hey, man, this could be a final, like, leg to the upside before downside. You might get that pop, Booksy, but maybe you think, hey, I don't think it's going to go up. I think it's going to crash, burn. I'm starting to believe that. I think that this LSPY idea has some serious teeth to it, but I'm really starting to think that this is a reaccumulation. I just don't think we can confirm it just yet. It's not possible. I think I mentioned in the video, it's like right on the edge. It was right here, and I said it's right on the edge of confirmation. It's just not quite there yet. And it ends up being the same problem we had here, right? You get the cross, you get that big pump up, and you get the cross here, you get that big pump up. This ends up being the same because it's a little head and shoulder if you look at the after hours action. And it drives the price back down, right? In this case, in the big picture, it looks like an LPS, but it really might just be a reaccumulation range. And if this springs, then I think you're going to be in good shape on the bigger picture, because then that reaccumulation confirms as a breakout and you end up with the continuation, whatever. I guess if this breaks down, it might be the earliest sign, the earliest signal that we have that this could become worse. So if this were to break down here and you get some kind of crazy action up and then it breaks down again and it starts making lower lows, or if it comes up to the top here and you get kind of that UTAD, which is a upthrust after distribution, that could also be a bad sign. Those are the only two real bad signs I think you would have right now. One would be around maybe that 730 area, 720 area. The other one would be way low here. And it'd have to show a breakdown and then some kind of a confirmation of resistance. So, I don't know, man. To me, this looks like it walked down the ways, and now it's going to get ready for reversal. I'm just trying to be a little bit optimistic about it. But I do think, unfortunately, maybe in terms of like movement, this may end up being like a $7 week. I don't know for a fact that we're going to ever head up farther than that this week. Seems like $7 would be a good place to leave it. So, yeah, you know, and I look at this and I'm like, this is also kind of misleading. Makes it look like this whole bar just got like eaten up. These three, it definitely looks much more distributive than accumulative in that regard on the daily. But I think that there's no real divergence on the daily here to speak of. So there's nothing really dangerous there. So if we can get that pick back up, it could be really good. It's not high volume either. It's strange. I don't know. That's a whole nother bit of analysis I have to go through. I don't like that it came above and then it's kind of sitting now below this guy. I almost wonder if it doesn't matter that much in the end. Certainly looks like a rejection if you draw it that way. I guess we'll find out soon enough. I feel like the example that we looked at with SPY is a really good example though, because like this definitely looks like a head and shoulder, and so did that SPY example. So a lot of it's going to be whether or not this does the same thing or not. So irritated about that 732 hit. Oh, man. Killing me. CVNA. Yeah, let's check it out. Charge point. I'll just hit on it right before I go to CVNA. Somebody asked about it. I had a retracement target of around 214, and it came pretty low. It came down to 213, 214. This is a Double Creek intersection here. There's not much else to say about it just yet. So it's about a 50% retracement. You can see 211's 50%, so it's not a big deal. If it can hold here, find some support, I think it's probably going to form a bit of a range right underneath the floor. The biggest problem would be us coming up one more time and rejecting off of 240. I think if it rejects off 240 again, it's going to be like a double top rejection. I think it would be done. So you want to see, if you're going to see a reaccumulation, you want to see it kind of hold above this creek. In my opinion, this would be pretty strong. So holding above 211. I'm only saying this because I know some people probably did trade this with me because I've been talking about it a lot. It's been a really good trade, but it's definitely has some weaknesses here in the way it's setting up. So you want to pay attention. I don't think it's broken down or anything. I just think that it needs to kind of regain footing in the twos here and then push back up above 240. If it can't get back above 240, then I would be really concerned. So if there's some kind of a push up to 240 and it distributes, I would be really, really concerned that it's just going to come really low again. Probably double bottom or something. I would definitely get out of that long-term call and just re-enter again. All right, I'm on the 1 hour. Let me go up to 4. What is CVNA? Carvana? Is that one of those? I don't know, Uber kind of things, or what is it? What do they do? What brought you to this stock? Why are you looking at it? EV, electric vehicle. Sell used cars. So this is a selling climax. Another kind of 2 buying climaxes right here. This is your buying climax. You can see pretty clearly the volume. That's a heck of a reaction, huh? That's a pretty good reaction. I'm on the daily right now, and it looks like it jumped over the 180-day moving average, and then it's kind of skirting with coming down. It's sort of thinking about it. I'm going to venture a guess that there might be a return to the top to try to sell again, which would be up here around 58. But I also think that there seems to be this kind of middle range. You can see the hits on it right there. So I'm not sure if this is going to drop or just if it's en route, or go back up, or if it's en route down. I'm just kind of talking as I'm walking through it, so I'll probably give you an answer if I can. RSI is positioned upward. It looks like it's gaining a little bit of momentum, but lost a lot during that drive. Actually got completely reset, so that's a good sign. Meaning it got to oversold very quickly here. I don't know, man. Trend is your friend until it isn't. So right now it seems like it's still in an uptrend. Don't really have any strong reason to doubt that it's in an uptrend still. I would be working on I would be working on this trend if I were you, just kind of chilling out with it. 46 degrees. Yeah, I think it's fine. It looks to me like it held in October, November. It held this bottom and it's broken out of that local downtrend. So I don't see any reason to be particularly suspicious about it just yet. You know, this is what I'm talking about. So it broke out, came back, retested it, made a new high, came back down, made a higher low, and then advanced. You just kind of watch volume to be wary of those sell-offs, but at least for here, it did exactly what I would expect a more bullish stock to do, which is, again, break over the downtrend, find support, advance, push against resistance, find higher support, and then push up again. I think the gap makes it a little bit scary. And then I guess what I would look for now is I would look at, if it's going to come back down, where would it go to retest something? You know, the moving average is an easy one, but I'm not sure it's going to come back down. You'd have to get really close now. I feel like it's probably forming like a sideways range, and we'll see if it breaks upward here. And then if it breaks upward, I think there'll be like an extension. It's sort of like another buying climax, like what you saw over here. And I think it'll come back up high. I can't tell you exactly where it might go. I'll have to zoom in a little bit. Yeah, see that? That looks like a creek jump. This is a bit weak. Coming down and making lower lows. So I may be a little bit nervous about that. But it does look like it jumped a creek here. So now what you'd wait for is you'd wait to see what happens when it gets to the top. And there's no guarantee with breakouts like this that they're going to run. Because if this was a sign of weakness, for whatever reason, if the sellers were like driving it down, this could just be very distributive. This could be like a UT, and then it's going to come up again and sell off at like 41. I'm not 100% on that because I don't think it came higher than the buying climax. But it doesn't necessarily have to either. That's the frustrating thing about these concept of a UT. It should, usually if it's a UT, come above the buying climax, but it didn't here. So I would be really careful about this, and I'd watch for this down here because it looks like it might be heading down. If it does drop, it would probably head down to fill that gap, intersect the 1 hour moving average. You're kind of just sitting in the middle right now. Somebody who trades Wyckoff doesn't typically trade phase B because it's not always really clear. It's one of the hardest ones to trade. This is coming from like a 100-year-old system. People think it's still hard to trade. That tells you something about it. I wouldn't trade upside on this unless I saw this advance right here. I'd probably be more likely to trade upside or downside on it if I saw something that like this where it broke down and then starts heading low. If it came above the top and then head down. There is a bit of a liquidity gap where that gap up was. I just think that the advancement here looks fine. That's I guess what I was trying to say is like this doesn't look bad to me, so I'm not sure why you would be that skeptical of the gap up. Part of me wonders again if it's just going to try to run up to the top and redistribute one more time. It's a buying climax. There should be some kind of a phase B top or an auto reaction after this one. Yeah, everything else is kind of okay here. Long term, I don't know if I would be so bold to say this is a head and shoulder right now, but because because it came up and hit that line almost perfectly, I think it's more valid. So a really loose head and shoulder tends to be a very loose target. Like you end up kind of not sure if it's going to get there. They tend to be a little bit more wishy-washy. This one seems pretty clear to me that this is a very strong level. This 5750 level seems really strong. So it's definitely, in my opinion, a strong candidate for an inverted head and shoulder. It is not confirmed yet. You would not say it's confirmed until it breaks the neckline. So it's pure speculation. But basically, it's like half of $53, roughly. So you might as well just say 26 just to be safe. And yeah, so that gets you up to like 83.44. What I like to do is just kind of estimate it and then try to see like what is that? Like where is it trying to go? If this is an inverted head and shoulder, where would it take you? And it looks like it's taking you to this level right here. And then I asked myself the question, like, does that make sense? Yeah, I think so. I think the goal might be to come back to here if this is an inverted head and shoulder. And I measured it not based on percentage, but based on dollar value. So long term, maybe what that is a retest of this right here. See that? So I think like long term, this could be like or short term, this could be like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave, where wave 1 is going to look similar to wave 5. So this wave might look pretty similar to, yeah, I don't know how low it's going to go. If it breaks down, I still think it could end up being a head and shoulder, maybe by next earnings. But you could see like 4 could be a really long wave down. Since it's already made a lot of advancement, it's possible that it doesn't hold this channel. So if it doesn't hold this channel, 4 could be a longer wave, and then this is roughly the measurement, and it takes you right about to where we were talking, maybe a little high. You can see there was this long-term downtrend here that was checked before it sold off back here in August of 2022. So again, inverted head and shoulder, it's kind of like all the selling, all the buying, looks pretty even weighted. So if you get another buy in here, it pushes up, probably hits that level between like 84 and 99. So yeah, so I think locally we might be in for another retest of a little bit higher. I wouldn't say much higher, but maybe like 50, something like that. And then possibly then it comes down. I definitely could see this being a lot longer of a play. So yeah, this could be like a big 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or either that or an ABC correction, where you see this kind of longer downtrend occur. Maybe more like that. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Right around earnings too. So it would not at all surprise me to see this come down into February to about $19. Just to recheck it. I don't think it's inevitable. Just think it's a possibility. The only way I would buy into this like with more fervor would be if it came above the top here and found support on 57. Makes sense? Yeah, I'll do a quick update. Market's about to close. Yeah, by the way, breaking this channel doesn't mean this is bearish, okay? Just think that that would probably happen if this were in a like a fourth wave, right? And I don't know exactly how to count that, but that's how I'd probably count it. And then I look for that reaction back up to the top. I think that's likely. As a head and shoulder extension of that, yada, yada, yada. Not inevitable, just possible based on the way this is moving now. I know that this is also going to be really important, and then this right here will be really important. So if I were going to have lines on my chart, it'd probably be those two, the uptrend, and then these guys locally. That's all you'd probably need. And then the supports we picked out. Yeah. All right. Update on AMC is that we need to hold support here. We've made a lower low. That's fine. We don't want to lose this support that we had around 672. I think we dipped beneath it already. So I'm not like, yeah, I think we dipped beneath it quite a bit. We hit 675. Where is it? Looks like we went below it. We hit 670. So we've already hit a new low here, which was to be expected, because we talked about the setup here being really similar to both the previous range bottom that we had, which was that little reaccumulation back in September, October, but also really similar to what we saw in SPY. If this little reaccumulation happens, so there's this advancement and then pullback that's really nasty, kind of an SOS with a backup, and you have a reaccumulation across the creek. If it holds here, what this should be locally is a tiny little spring, right, on the locale. And I know that the Wyckofians are going to be like talking about LSPYs. I'm not afraid of that. I think that that's possible. LSPY is basically where you have a buy-in that's low volume and then it drops. So it's like a bear flag. So we got to keep that in mind, that this isn't inevitable. But what we have seen is that if this can form out, find support, we may see this return right back to the top of the range and get a nice little SOS. It doesn't have to be today. It could be tomorrow. It could be late tomorrow. It could be Thursday, because we know that this is going a lot slower than the SPY example we looked at. So it doesn't look like it's quite as quick. I think that it's reasonable, though, to suggest that if it can hold here, that it's probably going to head back up. If we see it head back up, I'm personally just watching for that 715 up to 730 area. I've got two major creeks that I think we would need to cross. They don't look like anything right now because I don't have extended hours on. When I put on extended trading hours, you can see why I think those are important. One is kind of the lower two hits here. The other is the upper creek. So it's like pressed the resistance right here, was pushed up. I think those are going to be the big ones that we have to kind of get over and deal with. I think we're going to, while we do that, I think we're going to intersect 7. So it would not surprise me at all if we get a nice big move Wednesday or Thursday up to like 720, but then redistribute a little bit, like where this turns into a little bit of a distribution and we come way back down. Because I think that the goal might be then to get us to settle underneath or right around 7 going into Friday. So I could really see how in either way, if this advances or if it goes just sideways here, I could see how that would play out to create confusion for retail, that this could be good, this could be bad. And we would find out on Monday, more than likely. So I'm just going to go out on a limb here. If we see, I know that folks are going to be talking about 650 because of max pain, but I think that if we see this kind of bottom out and it finds support again over like 672, we should see it come right back up with quite a bit of a velocity, in my opinion. I think it'll probably reverse pretty fast. And I think we're going to see it come back up to the 7s. And I would be surprised if it went any further this week based on the way things are going. Maybe we'll have to wait for FOMC and PPI data, but I don't feel like this week we're going to see a lot of advancement. I think next week, again, if this kind of pans out for us, probably see that advancement begin next week. And then again, I think it cliffhangers into the winter holiday. I think we come up, we see a nice big move, everybody's happy, but then we get some kind of sideways action for a few days right before winter holiday. That's my current thought. And I still think that the door is very open for a distribution after that to come back down, as opposed to just continuing to run to the upside. I know a lot of folks, when they see this move here, will be thinking that it's definitely going to keep running. I don't think it's definite. I think that there's a strong chance that this isn't done with downside, and it's going to come back. Down. There's other folks that are going to be more bearish going into the end of this week. All I can say about that is that, look, I think locally this has to be proven as a distribution and a breakdown. So locally, first thing that would have to happen is that we would have to break down to like 655 and back up to 670 and then reject, right? So you need to see that kind of hook happen and then the breakdown happen. Then you need to see the larger breakdown happen, because this is just a tiny range. Breaking 672 is not enough, because 672 could be a spring action locally in this little guy, which could be a reaccumulation over this creek. This creek hasn't broken down yet. So while I understand why bears have this thesis, and then bulls have this thesis, neither is confirmed yet. Period. Like, that's all there is to it. The bear thesis would be confirmed with some kind of a breakdown here with a pop back to the upside. Or if this races up and does something like this, which I don't know, it'd be kind of weird to draw it. But if this raced up and then did something like this, that could be confirmation as well. I know you guys are thinking like, that's after the move. No. I think that coming up here doesn't really necessarily confirm bullish action, but it's very close to it. I think bullish action is confirmed as soon as you hit that 7 mark and then start the advancement. And you notice that we've never done that yet. Like, none of these have confirmed and then advanced off of 7. And here we just kind of went way past 7. We didn't really find any support when we came back down. So I was looking for it as a possibility today. Didn't happen. It did bounce on 7, then it came back up and then redistributed. That's all that happened. So I think that once we finally see that hit on 7 and then it starts advancing, that's the probably like the big buy-in. Like, that's probably where you see a lot of smart money buy-in, and you see a huge amount of volume, and then there's a pullback, and then it just goes. Until that point in time, I don't see it as confirmed. And then downside, I see it as pretty much the same equation. Like, you have to see it break down through this creek, then the bottom. And even the bottom itself, we could be skeptical about and say we think it could be a, more of a localized spring action. I think at that point, you're really like gambling a little bit, because it's very difficult to kind of sort of map this out as that. I think it would be hard to do because of where we are in relationship to the bigger picture. It's not impossible. It's just a challenge to say that's a spring or something, and then it reverses. That's all. So for here, I don't feel like there's any strong confirmation yet, unfortunately. I think this was confirmation for today. That breakdown below 7 to me was a confirmation that today was going to be bearish, and then it just ended up being bearish. But beyond that, it's not definitive to me. So yeah, makes sense. All right, I'll do a video about it tonight. Try to be a little bit more clear. I haven't really done much else today on it. I think the way this is set up on some time frames, it looks really bearish to me. And on other time frames, I kind of feel indifferent about it. Like, I feel like, it's not quite there yet. We're getting close to that do or die moment for sure. Like, we had one up here yesterday, and unfortunately it chose die. So we went back down. Now we're on another one on the other side of this range on the bottom. So kind of just went from one extreme to the other today. It stinks, but that's just the way AMC often is. And I wish I had enough foresight to see it coming, but I wasn't really looking at that SPY example. So now I've kind of got my brain thinking about that and thinking about these iterations and this guy and just considering it. So hopefully it plays out better. I'll try to do a video for later tonight. I think we need one more update. Tomorrow I'm going to be gone most of the day. So if you are in the Discord group, probably won't be around. Jose, I'll give you a link. You have to read through the welcome and rules. And if you get booted, you're just gone. On SPY? Yeah, I can do SPY before I head out today. I gotta find it. I have a SPY chart. Hold on. Maybe it was on the same one. I really butchered my SPY chart when I was doing that comparison earlier on stream. So let me see if I can clear it up a bit. Yeah. Well, I misread the top here. I thought this was going to break down. Thankfully, I got out of that put position pretty fast. But I had gotten into a put position here on this bounce right around 456 because I thought SPY needs a bigger correction. It's probably not going to hold here. You can see why. I mean, it looked like a setup that was going to break down. And it kind of did, but it took like extra time. So what I did is I got out of that put position really fast because when it bounced here, it actually came back down 50%. And then it went down to like 455 or something like that. And then it bounced and I was like, nah, that doesn't look right. If it's bearish, it would continue down. And so I got out. No harm really done. I mean, it was a small loss. But I just took it and was like, all right, we'll just wait and see. I've had other people in our Discord group that have been pretty accurate about these runs. A lot of them are charting like VIX. Some are just looking at the big picture and seeing different things. At this point, we've chopped along the top here of this previous top, and then we've advanced again. So that tells me that we're heading up. We'll see what we can see here in terms of support. I'm not convinced that we have actually come back and tested this top at 459. So don't put that out of your possibility, because a lot of times when we advance like this, we need to kind of do a back test on the previous high. That's pretty normal. So we should be able to see that come in before it happens. This whole thing has been just ridiculous bullish, though. I mean, it's a huge Santa rally. I think if you get that good news tomorrow for FOMC, probably going to see this thing like really go. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some kind of a massive drop back down to 459 and then advanced, just to kind of keep everybody like worried, if that makes sense. I think the main check right here that we just did, you can see this. I don't want to call it a head and shoulder, but we've been talking like that, so I'm just going to use that. You can see these resistances here, these sell-offs here that occurred right around this particular level, which is 453.57, and that's the one that we kind of just bounced off of here. So I think that check is done. I don't think we necessarily have to come back and do that one again in the near future. The last time we did a check in advance, we just kind of kept going. You can see that there was some pretty massive sell-offs back in December of 2021. The sky's the limit, really. The next place I see a lot of supply is way up here at like 467, and we're getting close to that. You can see if you go back to the previous highs here, this is the last time we saw some distribution, was like right there. So we're basically right underneath it. I personally would just be kind of wary of that, because if you're going to make a pullback before an advancement, you'd probably do it where people have historically sold off a lot. And this would have been a level that a lot of people would have had traded. You know what I mean? bigger institutions. So for them, you got to think about like cycles and returning back to a level that they went to before this recession would be very important, significant, right? And that's been the case all the way up. Like these are historically significant levels that, again, you find that there's a lot of supply. Like last time we hit this supply, there was a ton of supply here, right? It sold off, went way back down. So I would be really mindful of that we're entering that zone. It goes from where we are now to about 470. So 465 to 470 might be a bit of a danger zone. And then considering like where we are in FOMC kind of terms, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe if it's really good news, maybe we do get a drop just to check some other support, I don't know, below us, but we probably would then see a big advancement back up into this area up to 470s. I think if there's a surprise, you might see it go up first, then down, because a lot of times they're trying to get out of their positions very quickly. Same thing with like puts. They drop the price really quickly and then cover their puts and then get out, right? Or, you know what I mean? So, or sell them, right? So you have to kind of keep in mind that it's not always the first move, it's often the second move, and it's usually very quick on that day, tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen before Powell talks or before the data is released. Right now, it just looks like it's right on the edge of that breakout. It hit the top, so it could break out. And if it does, it's really strong. I think it'll go all the way up first. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I expect there to be some kind of a up and down motion in this region tomorrow, assuming that we get there. And if for some reason we come back down first, I think it's very unlikely that we go below the previous top at like 460. So I think that would be a decent place to have like a 50% retracement probably on this move, which I'm going to guess it's about there, 460. So if I saw it come back down to 460, I'd probably be inclined to buy in if I think the news is going to be bullish. If I saw that move first. If I saw it go up and it somehow gets all the way up to like the 470s, I'd still anticipate on a bullish announcement there be a drop and then a push back up. That's just my 2 cents. FOMC days have rarely been without an incredible amount of volatility. So usually there's a lot. After FOMC, if the news was good and what the market wanted, I don't think it's out of the question that we see this kind of go ahead and head up to all-time highs. I think it's very likely. We're just there. So I don't say it might as well, but it just seems really odd to kind of come here and not get it. The only thing I guess I'm worried about is this previous supply level. I mean, once you're past that, I don't know why you wouldn't. But you got to be realistic after that, because even if it got above all-time highs, it doesn't mean that it's going to run and keep running forever. You have to see that SOS. You have to see it find support over 480. And if it doesn't, well, just as an example, not a copy-paste kind of thing, but as an example, like go back to 2008. People don't like to talk about it, but I know it's a different time. I know it's not exactly the same. But just in terms of a range, that drop in 2008 was not in a vacuum. You know, there was a lot of stuff that happened for the several years prior. It was a lot longer time period, right? A lot of stuff happened leading up to that 2008 drop. And one of the big things was that there was already like an early push. And I'm on the daily. It's like taking forever to load here. Back in the year 2000. And I don't know, like in terms of a it's a really strange top, but basically once it got there, it just peaked over it just a little bit, and then it just started a free fall. So I think that that would be the only real danger at the top. And by the way, if we did do something like this, I'm not personally like saying we will just yet. I've been talking about this on and off for a while. Like, there's a lot of similarities. There's plenty of differences as well, but there is a lot of similarities. And if we did do something like this, we would be heading back down, you know? We'd be going back down towards this like 350 pocket, probably down to like 330s. I think it's very likely we hit like 330s in 2024. And it might be one of those things where it's tied to that election year, so we'll see. I just think you're going into a really important range at the top, so you just got to be careful. There's not even much to say on RSI. It's overbought, but whatever. A SPY can be overbought quite a bit and still have, you know, relative strength. On higher time frames, it might look different. We'll see. Yeah, I just keep thinking like there's probably a reason that we're just continuing up without making that retrace. So I'm a little bit skeptical of it until we get to the near the top, maybe when we get to this supply area. But I'm happy for people that made a lot of money on it, you know. Hindsight's always 20/20. Now I would just kind of look at this range and say, yeah, from here to here, there could be some action. And then I would look at the top. Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you later. Hope you all have a good one.